Hi again, this is Andy, KE4GKP, and welcome back to the Ham Whisperer and Lesson 9 in the General Class Operator Element 3 exam. In this lesson, we go over the G2D questions. All right, the G2D questions cover amateur auxiliary, minimizing interference, and HF operations. What is the amateur auxiliary to the FCC? And the answer is amateur volunteers who are formally enlisted to monitor the airways for rules violations. So essentially, these are the amateur compliance police, so Big Brother, if you will. So they're out there, and you'd be surprised how many of them are out there, and you'd be surprised how many people they catch breaking the rules. So if you go to the ARL webpage or subscribe to QST, the offenders are listed every month along with what punishment they received. So they are out there, obey the rules, and the amateur auxiliary won't get you. What are the objectives of the amateur auxiliary? Well, the objectives of the amateur auxiliary are to encourage amateur self-regulation and compliance with the rules. And of the possible answers, this is the only one that makes sense. And if you can remember that the amateur auxiliary are the radio cops, it makes sense. So the purpose or the objective of the amateur auxiliary is to encourage amateur self-regulation and compliance with the rules. What skills learned during fox hunts are of help to the amateur auxiliary? Well, direction finding skills used to locate stations violating FCC rules. So fox hunts are basically amateur competitions which look for hidden transmitters. So basically you get a directional antenna and a receiver and a strength meter, and you pretty much run around the woods looking for hidden transmitters. The focus is using the directional antennas to find the hidden signal. So it's all about direction finding. What is an azimuthal projection map? Well, it's a world map projection centered on a particular location, and this is kind of a bad question because one of the possible answers refers to a map centered on the North Pole, which technically is a type of azimuthal map. So the best answer is kind of the general answer for this one. It's a map centered on a particular point. What is the most useful type of map to use when orienting a directional HF antenna toward a distant station? Well, like the previous question, the answer is azimuthal projection. And azimuth means direction. So if you want to use a map to orient a direction to another station, you want to use an azimuthal projection map, if you can pronounce it right. How is a directional antenna pointed when making a long path contact with another station? Well, a long path contact with another station is 180 degrees from its short path heading. So if you imagine a globe, the short path points directly at the station going the shortest way around the globe. The long path takes the long way around the globe, so the antenna would point 180 degrees from the station. So this would be like driving from Wilmington, North Carolina to Los Angeles, California, going east, vice west. Which of the following information must a licensee retain as part of their station records? And this is a very bad question in my opinion. The answer to the question is antenna gain calculations or manufacturer's data for antennas used on 60 meters. And the bottom line there is that if you're using anything other than a dipole on 60 meters, you're supposed to maintain gain calculations and the manufacturer's data for that antenna. And the other problem with this question is that the reference they use for the question is wrong. It doesn't say anything about 60 meters. I fished through the Part 97 rules. If you're looking for the actual reference in the Part 97, it is 97 Tax 303S. So antenna gain calculations or manufacturer's data for antennas used on 60 meters. Why do many amateurs keep a log even though the FCC doesn't require it? Well, the answer to the question on the exam is to help with a reply if the FCC requests information on who was a control operator of your station at a given date and time. Now, if you ask any amateur, it's always important to keep a log, and I know a lot of 2-meter users and 440 users don't do it when they're talking repeaters, stuff like that. But not only does a log keep track of all your communications, but it will also cover your rear if your ham buddy uses your radio and gets caught breaking the rules. So remember the amateur auxiliary, they're looking for you. So keep a log. However, the answer to this question is to help with a reply to the FCC if they request information on who the control operator was. What information is traditionally contained in a station log? Well, this isn't all of the above question. It's a pretty simple amount of information. You want to keep the date and time of the contact, the band and or frequency of the contact, and the call sign of the station contacted and the signal report. So the who, what, and when and where of the contact. And there's lots of reasons for keeping the log, and I highly recommend that you keep a log for all your contacts, even though the FCC doesn't require you to do so. But it just saves a lot of trouble in the long run, and also it helps keep track of who you contact in case you're looking for an award or something. So always keep a log and keep the date and time of contact, the band and frequency, and the call sign and signal report of the person you talk to. What is QRP operation? Well, QRP is a Q signal for low power transmit operation, typically about 5 watts. And depending on who you talk to, it'll be 5 watts or less. And to me, and you don't have to agree with me, QRP operation is the pinnacle of amateur radio skill, because you can't just blast your way to get a contact. You really got to kind of manipulate and massage the airwaves and have a good antenna, and your operator skills really got to be honed to make some solid contacts in those. So if you can operate a station on QRP, you pretty much can do anything in amateur radio. So I'm a big fan of it, and also QRP equipment is easy to make as well and is much cheaper than the big stuff. So QRP is 5 watts or less. Which HF antenna would be the best to use for minimizing interference? Well, the answer is a unidirectional antenna. And this makes a lot of sense compared to the other possible answers. A unidirectional antenna only focuses a signal in one direction, thus minimizing potential interference in all other directions. So it almost acts like a filter by just focusing both the sent signal and the received signal in one direction. So all the other noise off to the east, to the west, or wherever else you're not pointing that antenna will be blanked out, and it'll just focus on the signal in one direction. Which of the following is required by the FCC rules when operating in the 60-meter band? All right, we talked a little bit about this before, but if you are using anything other than a dipole antenna, you must keep a record of the gain of your antenna. And I'm not exactly sure why they're concerned about this, but on 60 meters, the antenna is the key to this question, and it's almost better to eliminate the others. So to help, you already know that you're not required to keep a logbook by the FCC, and that knocks out 2 of the possible answers. The other incorrect answer includes a record of the rest of your equipment as well. All you're worried about is the antenna. So if you have multiple antennas that you use for 60 meters, you need to keep track of the gain of those antennas. If you're not using a dipole. If you're using a dipole, I guess all rules are off. And that's the end of the G2D review and part 1 of lesson 9. So if you have trouble finding part 2, go to hamwhisper.com, look under the ham courses page, and you can find it there. So take a break, and I will see you in part 2.